We are diving deep today into a document that sounds incredibly dry, maybe the kind of thing filed away and forgotten.
Right.
But it actually represents one of the most significant pivots in modern American cultural policy. Public Law 99-194.
Yeah, officially it's the Arts, Humanities, and Museums Amendments of 1985, approved right before Christmas that year, December 20th.
And this act isn't just about tweaking budgets. It's basically a blueprint, isn't it, for modernizing and really broadening the focus of the National Endowment for the Arts,
NEA.
the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH, and all their related cultural institutions.
Exactly. And for you, our listener, the mission here is pretty crucial, I think. We're taking a shortcut to understand how these federal agencies back in the mid-'80s were essentially forced to shift their core identity.
Forced by law.
Yeah, mandated by law to prioritize equity, to start serious national data collection, and to fundamentally rethink public access. And, all this required moving away from some really outdated language.
Definitely explicitly gendered language,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Language and structures embedded in the original 1965 Act.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The power of this law really starts with language, because the first thing Congress did was systematically, erase some very old exclusionary terms right out of the Declaration of Purpose for the Foundation. When you look at the amendments to the original act, the intent is, immediately clear. They were correcting the historical record.
And this is more than just semantics, right? That's really a philosophical declaration. In the language defining the purpose of the arts and humanities, the possessive pronoun mans was struck out.
Just gone.
Yeah, that small edit, but repeated throughout the document, it signaled a much broader cultural inclusion. It was a big symbolic change.
And the change related to who actually had access to culture was even more dramatic, I thought.
Oh, definitely.
The original clause dealing with access was fundamentally rewritten. The document struck out the reference to men.
Which sounds so dated now.
Right. And inserted in its place the phrase, people of all backgrounds and wherever located.
That is profound. It redefined the audience from, potentially a narrow, maybe elite group implied in the original text to literally everyone in the United States.
A universal mandate.
Absolutely. And coupled with that, they added the requirement that the foundation promote and access to the arts and the humanities right after the word education. It's an active mandate. Go out and reach people.
That's a massive shift in governmental philosophy, mandated by law.
Yeah.
But the act didn't just stop at cleaning up old terms. It actually created new, specific educational mandates for future generations.
It absolutely did. They inserted a really clear goal in the Declaration of Purpose, stating that Americans should receive in school background and preparation in the arts and humanities.
Okay.
And the goal wasn't just to make them consumers of art, but really to enable them to appreciate the aesthetic dimensions of life and recognize the diversity of excellence in our cultural heritage. That sets a very clear ongoing mandate for K-12 education in those fields.
And even the sort of technical definitions got an update. The law broadened the scope of what the humanities actually do.
Yeah, that was interesting. The term study was amended to include an interpretation, which recognizes that humanities scholarship involves more than just basic research. It's about meaning making.
Right. And maybe most importantly, the foundation's focus was expanded to give particular attention to reflecting our diverse heritage, traditions, and history.
These, subtle word changes were really the legal groundwork that made the later governance and grant changes possible. Once they updated the definition of who they serve, they kind of had to update how they serve them.
Right. Makes sense. So if the language shift redefined who the endowment served, how did the law ensure the bureaucracy actually delivered on that promise? Because that moves us into governance, and this law launched what was essentially a systematic, top-to-bottom gender neutrality campaign across the entire structure.
Yeah, this was a crucial administrative overhaul. The law systematically replaced chairman with chairperson everywhere. And he is with the chairperson or the chairpersons in every section governing the NEA, the NEH, and their respective national councils. This wasn't just one section. It was like a find and replace across the whole statute.
Wow. I mean, that procedural change alone signaled to the public that the federal cultural apparatus was finally, maybe, committed to shedding its decades-old boys' club image.
You'd hope so.
And this commitment extended right into the funding decisions, didn't it?
Precisely. The law built in specific mandates to target the underrepresented, making diversity a statutory priority, not just, a nice to have.
So what did that look like for grants?
For NEA grants, there was a strict new priority for projects that reach or reflect the culture of a minority, inner city, rural, or tribal community. That's highly specific language.
For the leadership.
The NEA chairperson was explicitly required to give particular regard to artists and artistic groups that have traditionally been underrepresented.
And the NEH, same thing.
Mirrored it, exactly. Its chairperson had to give particular regard to scholars and educational and cultural institutions that have traditionally been underrepresented.
So it wasn't just encouraging diversity, it was actually mandating a focus on those who have historically been left out.
Right. And given the cultural battles raging in the mid-'80s, this was a difficult and extremely powerful political lift, I think. It really cemented the endowment's role in supporting marginalized voices, at least on paper.
And this focus on access and accountability, it extended right down to the local level through transparency requirements too.
It did. The amendments instituted pretty stringent new requirements for state plans submitted to the endowments.
Like what?
Well, state agencies, whether receiving NEA or NEH funds, now had to provide assurances of holding public meetings, and they had to give reasonable notice to allow artists, scholars, and the general public to present their views on the state plan.
And here's the kicker, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just a requirement to listen.
Exactly. The state plans had to include a summary of those public recommendations and a summary of the state agency's response to them.
That's real accountability.
It mandated public input and accountability, forcing local agencies to actually engage directly with the public they were supposed to be serving.
Okay, so if the first major theme of 1985 was equity, what was next?
The second was quantifiability. What's fascinating here is the new emphasis on collecting national data. Before this law, funding decisions might have been, somewhat anecdotal or based on reputation.
Sure.
After this law, they had to be data-driven by law.
It truly is the moment cultural policy became quantifiable and measurable by statute. Both the NEA and the NEH chairpersons were required to develop a practical system of national information and data collection on the arts and humanities.
And that system had to be exhaustive. I mean, it had to track everything from artistic and financial trends to trends in audience participation and arts and humanities education.
Across the board.
Yeah, across national, regional, and state levels. And crucially, the system had to provide detailed information on the availability of programs to various audience segments, specifically including rural communities. They called that out.
This wasn't just data for data's sake then. This data collection was the mechanism Congress used to ensure compliance with those equity mandates we just talked about.
Precisely. The law mandated periodic biennial reports starting in 1988. The State of the Arts and the State of the Humanities reports.
Where?
Submitted directly to the President and Congress. And these reports were required to focus specifically on the availability of the endowments programs to emerging, rural, and culturally diverse artists, scholars, and communities.
You can't hide a lack of outreach when you are legally obligated to measure and report on it.
Right, and that same desire for diversity and accountability was baked right into the administrative rules for how grant funding decisions were actually made. The law established detailed new administrative provisions for selecting panels of experts.
Who decides who gets the money?
Exactly. They weren't simply looking for the most famous experts. The law mandated that panels must broadly represent diverse characteristics.
Meaning?
In terms of aesthetic or humanistic perspective, geography, and cultural diversity, this was really designed to break up old power structures, the usual suspect.
And they couldn't stick around forever either.
No. To prevent stagnation and potential groupthink, panel membership had to change substantially every year. There was a hard 20% limit on how many members could serve beyond 3 consecutive years on any subpanel.
So you couldn't just have the same group of well-connected insiders running the show indefinitely.
That was the idea. And finally, on the administrative front, Title II of the law included a mandate for the Federal Council on the Arts and the Humanities to conduct a big study specifically on museum services.
Okay, what about museums?
This required assessing the nature and level of federal support, looking for overlaps or inadequacies, especially, they noted, in the case of emerging museums, and reviewing the impact of the Institute of Museum Services and conservation programs. It was a real top-down assessment of the entire museum ecosystem.
Okay, moving now into the financial side, we saw clear legislative commitments and scope increases in Title III, particularly related to major cultural exhibitions. we need to talk about the Arts and Artifacts Indemnity Act,
Ah, yes, the indemnity.
which is basically the federal insurance policy that protects cultural objects when they travel for big shows. Right?
That's a crucial clarification, yeah. When you see a major Van Gogh or, King Tut exhibition, the reason it can safely travel to the U.S. is often because the federal government provides insurance through this Indemnity Act.
So what changed in '85?
The 1985 law signaled increasing federal confidence, I think, in supporting large, globally significant cultural exchanges by giving the act a huge financial lift.
Oh, huge.
The total indemnity agreement amount that the federal government could guarantee was significantly raised from $400 million.
Which sounds like a lot already.
Right, up to $650 million. And the maximum coverage for a single exhibition was also raised, jumping from $50 million to $75 million.
So bigger, riskier, more valuable exhibitions could now travel to the U.S.
Exactly. It opened the door for more ambitious international projects. And the government backed this whole new mandate for access and equity with a clear financial commitment, too.
More money.
Well, authorized money. Instead of listing every single maximum here, the intent is clear. The law detailed authorized appropriation maximums for the endowments for the next 3 fiscal years, 86 through 88.
Showing a plan.
Exactly. It showed Congress was planning for sustainable growth, authorizing an increase in funding of roughly 10% for both the NEA and the NEH over that period. Modernization was clearly meant to be funded, not just legislated on paper.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Away from the budget numbers and the regulatory updates, this law also gave us a new national cultural title in Title VI.
Ah, yes.
It formally established the Poet Laureate of the United States.
Yes. For many years, the Library of Congress had a position called the Consultant in Poetry. Title VI formally recognized that this existing position was equivalent to the Poet Laureate of the United States.
So it wasn't creating something totally new.
No, it wasn't creating a new office from scratch. It was elevating the status of an existing respected literary role, recognizing its historical prominence and, service to the nation, giving it a proper title.
And to formalize this, the NEA was mandated to annually sponsor a public program where the Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry would present a major work, or the work of other distinguished poets.
With dedicated funding authorized annually for that program starting in fiscal year 87. A small detail, perhaps, in a massive law, but it codified a national role for poetry.
And we can't overlook Title V either, which was crucial in cementing the importance of historical education around that time.
Right, the bicentennial was coming up.
Exactly. It authorized $5 million annually for 5 years, from FY 1987 through 1991, for the Commission on the Bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution.
That's a decent chunk of change over 5 years.
And this money was specifically designated for grants to develop instructional materials and programs on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights for K-12 students.
Including a national competition, I believe.
Yeah, that was a serious multi-year investment in K-12 civic education.
So if we connect this all to the bigger picture.
Oh.
The Arts, Humanities, and Museums Amendments of 1985 were truly a landmark law. It wasn't just a minor reauthorization. It was a fundamental redefinition of American cultural policy for the next era.
Yeah, feels like it.
This one act really institutionalized clear equity goals. It modernized all that outdated gendered language across the entire federal apparatus, and it prioritized measurable public access through rigorous data collection.
Exactly. It shows that major social policy shifts can often be found hidden within what looks like, dry technical legislation. This one law fundamentally moved cultural funding from a system maybe implicitly focused on a traditional elite, the man's arts, as they put it, to one explicitly mandated to serve people of all backgrounds and wherever located.
We saw that powerful philosophical shift from man's to all people, the practical administrative shift from chairman to chairperson.
Across the board.
And the cultural elevation of American poetry through the establishment of the Poet Laureate title. These were not minor fixes. They were intentional declarations of purpose that, still guide these endowments today in many ways.
Okay, and here is a final provocative thought, maybe built right into the text, this law. Title IV mandated a study on alternative federal funding for the endowments.
Ah, yes. This is fascinating. The Comptroller General was required to look into ways of supplementing the endowment's budgets using non-tax revenue.
Meaning funding the arts without asking Congress for more tax dollars every year.
That was the idea they had to explore.
And the specific creative funding mechanisms they were required to consider included revenue from extending the existing federal copyright period.
which is always controversial.
Right. Or, even more controversially perhaps, charging payments for using artistic, dramatic, literary, and musical works that were already in the public domain.
Imagine that. So this raises a really important question for you to think about. Had those non-tax revenue mechanisms derived from intellectual property actually been adopted? Had the cultural agencies gained some kind of self-sustaining funding source back then?
How might the financial stability and independence of U.S. cultural funding look today compared to relying solely on often contentious annual government appropriations?
It makes you wonder how differently our cultural landscape might operate if the arts were partially funded by the market or by their own legacy content rather than solely by the decisions of the legislature each year. Something to consider.